Let me get your first immediate reaction. What's your sense in terms of what's going on and these movements just over the past 24 hours?
Well, very problematic for the government. It's also and I lament the fact that this does not reflect well on our system of justice, one that we have professed to be independent, to be arm's length from government, to be free of political interference. This has the feel, and perhaps we will see more evidence, of government interference in what are supposed to be entirely impartial arm's length judicial and prosecutorial decisions.
And that is still supposedly what has actually happened in terms of arm's length, meaning that the system is still in place and still works well. But of course, everybody does want to hear from Jody Wilson-Raybould. When can we perhaps expect to hear from her? What are the rules surrounding that?
Well, interesting developments today. As you noted, she stepped down from cabinet. She has hired a lawyer, the Honourable Thomas Cromwell, a former Supreme Court justice, very capable individual, to advise her. She may be speaking through her lawyer. One of the interesting comments made by the Prime Minister yesterday that you didn't show is his characterization of a discussion that he had with Jody Wilson-Raybould. That is sometimes implied as having now opened up or waived the issue of privilege, because you can't just disclose part of the conversation or characterize part of the discussion. By so doing, you may have waived any claim of privilege.
What does that mean then, Peter?
Well, what it means, Catherine, is by operation of law, in the views of justice, you're not supposed to be able to only make a partial disclosure because it takes it out of context. It might distort its actual meaning. And that's why we need to hear from Wilson-Raybould. We need to know what she felt, how she interpreted what words were spoken, if any. And let's be clear, she could have ended this entire controversy some time ago by simply saying, I wasn't pressured, I wasn't influenced. There was at no time a sense that the Prime Minister's office, somebody in his staff, or anyone made me feel like I had to do something. What we have is the circumstantial evidence that she was shuffled out and clearly not happy about it. And what we have now is an anonymous source disclosed through the Globe and Mail that says she was in fact forced or being told she had to act a certain way towards SNC-Lavalin, which resulted in so much of what we are now seeing play out in the press.
When you saw the cabinet reshuffle, though, what did you think of that? Did you anticipate anything coming? Well,
it was very odd, and let's go back as to why this happened in the first instance. You had another cabinet minister who stepped down amidst speculation that he, Scott Bryson, was involved in the politicization of the criminal code offense that's being prosecuted now against Admiral Mark Norman. And so, again, you have a narrative around political interference in our judicial system, as we have with the Huawei executive who was going through an extradition hearing. And we saw, an ambassador step down over inappropriate comments there. So it is beginning to undermine the government's credibility, the government's claim of ethics, and arm's length respect for the rule of law. And this is very detrimental and very serious. And I suspect this is going to play out now over many weeks and months, leading into an election in October. And ultimately, Canadians are the ones who get to decide.
Well, Peter, from a timing perspective, and you mentioned the elections, how would this actually evolve into the elections from a timing perspective, just because it seems as though these investigations or examinations take so long? What will we actually learn?
Well, that remains to be seen, and it depends on who is called. An ethics review will probably not result in much disclosure publicly. It may result in a slap on the wrist. Effectively, they don't have the resources, the subpoena powers. A parliamentary committee, similarly, is very often a circus partisan exercise that can ultimately bring people before Parliament, but it may not be the best means. And I'm not suggesting this is going to happen because it's still early days and it's speculative, but a criminal investigation around obstruction of justice is a possibility. Given the seriousness of this instance, given what's at stake, and given the current evidence that we have of a cabinet minister stepping down, of legislation being changed for a specific purpose, and then the lobby register, which shows that there was pressure, or there were at least attempts to pressure the Justice Minister to make a certain decision.
And what do you make of her line in her resignation that says she is seeking, and we talked about this a little bit, but she's seeking legal counsel. She has legal counsel. How do you interpret that?
Well, I interpret that as she is protecting her own interests. And there's another important statement.
And herself.
And herself, her personal career, her personal legal rights. There's another important statement, Catherine, that she made and released at the time of her demotion, let's call it, to a different portfolio, wherein she talked about the unique position of the Attorney General, Justice Minister, being less inclined to partisan and political influence, the integrity of the system. She deserves full credit. If that is in fact the case, the reason that she is stepping down, the reason that she refused or rebuffed efforts to influence her, our very system is predicated on the separation of our legal judicial system from political interference. Now we have raised the specter that this is in fact the case, and that in these instances the justice system was not immune from political interference. I suspect there may be some more resignations from the Prime Minister's office.
Well, to understand the rules here, as an Attorney General, is she truly bound, because this is a conversation I was actually having yesterday, is she truly bound by secrecy in responding to allegations, just to take it back even a few days ago? Because some people, of course, can be skeptical as to why we didn't hear from her.
That's a great question, and her silence, I guess, is what has spawned this ongoing discussion. You are bound by cabinet confidentiality to disclose specifics of the discussion. You're certainly bound, in this instance, not to disclose anything that could jeopardize the Crown's case vis-a-vis SNC-Lavalin, but simply saying, I was or I wasn't influenced, I felt this pressure or I didn't feel, I believe would not be outside the bounds of secrecy in what she could have said.
What about this balancing act? My goodness, we are not robots. We are not yet run by AI. We have to understand the rules of the game always and respect the rules of the game and the rule of law. But you know, when you take a look at balancing different roles, do we need to make any changes to the laws or how people's roles evolve, given the complex nature of the economies, politics, dealing with outside governments outside of Canada that are also complex in nature and getting even more so? And
human frailties, because
that's exactly
in that office, which I've had the privilege of occupying, you have the Justice Minister, so legislative and important drafting and interaction with Cabinet. You have the Attorney General, which is, let's say, more operational, involving prosecutions, both civil and criminal. You have the political dynamic, and you have the obligations to Cabinet, your constituents, and the country. And in this instance, you have your personal integrity and feelings on the matter. Difficult in sometimes to parse all of those various roles. And time will tell as to what was behind the various actions that we have seen. Being changed in your role to a different portfolio, now stepping down, and what will or will not happen in the SNC-Lavalin case is also very important and has a huge impact on the economy, not just of Quebec, not just the country, but globally. The current Justice Minister also has to make these various important decisions, and it begs the question, under what circumstances did he take on this new role? And he, in my view, should not be talking publicly about this case, should not be speculating on whether SNC is still going to be considered for a deferred prosecution agreement or remediation agreement. He should also be stepping back at this point and not publicly commenting.
Just one last question, and it surrounds SNC, because of course we have viewers who might own the stock, and we talk about it a lot. Where does all of this then leave the company?
Well, the company has been in some serious jeopardy for a long time, and they have taken a lot of steps, to be fair, to make amends, if you will, but not in the legal sense. And they are still facing this criminal prosecution. This is at the heart of the case as to whether they would or would not be considered for this remediation agreement, which is a lesser way in which the criminal justice system would proceed. And it's a new system, just brought in this past fall by this government. And so it does remain to be seen whether they will come through this process with the benefit of that new process, which would importantly, Catherine, prevent them from being debarred from doing and bidding on business in Canada. And so it has a huge impact on their bottom line and how they will proceed in the future.
Peter, so much there. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. That is Peter MacKay. He served as Canada's Attorney General and Minister of Justice under Stephen Harper and is now a partner with Baker McKenzie.